the touchy subject of being fired from your band, because I've been fired from a band before, believe it or not. um, and I've done the firing, so uh, yeah, it's a little tricky, and I thought about this too because a little over a week ago I ran into John Conley. He is the original drummer for Midline, and we were both at a high school football game. And as I was walking, at the base of the bleachers, I hear him yelling, "Fred, Fred!" And I look up, and sure enough, there's John Conley. And so I grabbed Jude, and me and Jude went up, and we sat with John and his family for the whole game, and watched a little of the game, and talked a lot about drums and the good old days and things like that. So I'll come back to John in a second, but being in a band, it doesn't matter what level you are. It doesn't matter if you're a group of people that are just jamming in your garage, or you're a worldwide superstar band. People get fired from the band. And there's, it's so relational, relationships, and there's a lot of emotion that's attached to that. And then what we see as the public is not always what's actually happening behind the scenes. So you have to keep that in mind as well. When there's, drama makes good TV. So the more drama that could seem to get infused in these situations, it almost seems like it's easier to be fired or fire somebody if there's a bunch of drama attached to it. And even if it's, somewhat fabricated, it seems like it's easier to deal with just that to somebody and saying get out, versus like trying to figure out what the deal is and still have some kind of relationship beyond the instruments and beyond that whole scene. So no matter what level you are on, and the reasons for being fired, the reasons are endless. There's no possible way to cover in the next 40 minutes, all the reasons that you'd get fired from a band, or all the scenarios that would surround that. And I think any of us who are watching this currently or may watch it later, and if you've played music, you can think of a reason why something happened that person's no longer in the band. And so I just scribbled a couple quick notes. I hope I put them in some kind of an order here. I think one of the big things is we're all people. We all have our own ideas of things. We have our different belief systems that we have, if we have any at all. And you come together for a common purpose, and that's to play music, and then, I remember when I was a teenager and I started putting bands together when I was in high school. And the very first attempt I had at that is I met a guitar player who was in my woodshop class in junior high. And we liked all the same music. And I knew he played guitar. I had run into him at the music store all the time. And, I think at that time I was sophomore, junior in high school, and for where I was, I thought that I was a fairly decent drummer, and so we decided to have him come over and jam. And my parents were going to be gone for the night, so I was able to take my drums out of my bedroom and go into the living room, which is a much bigger room, and I was all set up and prepared, and I knew a lot of songs. And this guy showed up with this half stack guitar rig and just stands there with his guitar in his hands and doesn't play anything all night ever. And it was a huge disappointment. And so it wasn't that we had a band, but that experience with him made me never want to have another experience with him like that again. So as we, days and weeks went on, he started, are we going to jam again? And I thought, no, we're not. And he said, what, are you firing me from the band? We got together one time for 2 hours, excuse me, and you didn't play one chord. You never went, ah, bah. You didn't know one song. You didn't know any riff, nothing. So even at that time, being like 15 or 16 years old, I just thought, I don't want to waste my time with this person who either can't or won't play. I had an idea. I'm going to move forward, and it seemed so strange and silly to me that we had this one experience that wasn't good. And when I said, no, I'm not interested in trying to jam with you, how bent out of shape he got, because, he already claimed we had a band and we didn't do anything. So even that, man, excuse me, even that scenario was starting to lean to kind of be in an ugly situation. And I mean, there was no substance to it whatsoever. So it was just crazy. Gary's here. Morning, Uncle Fred. Fred, back from Nashville. Nice. You're back in Nashville right now, Gary, or you just got back from Nashville? Either way, you went to Nashville or in Nashville, and I'm not with you. Maybe we should figure that out. I don't know what's going on with my throat suddenly. It's probably because I'm talking about such a sensitive topic. So there's one scenario, right? And as bands become more familiar with each other, you learn things about each other. And when you're good morning, John. When you're getting together in a room with each other, not are you trying to figure out, can I play music with these people? Like, do I get along with these people? So you got to be able to musically gel, and you got to have the hang, And sometimes you have the hang and not the music. Sometimes you have the music and not the hang. And so that would be reasons maybe why you can't work together. Because maybe you have somebody that's the coolest hang on the planet, but they can't play their instrument very well at all. And, how long are you going to accept working under those conditions, So, as your band gets established and you start working together, and it seems to me like if I would just watch like the lifespan of a local band, let's say, it seems like most lifespans of local bands are around the 2-year mark, because that seems to be like how long it takes to go through all these steps of rehearsing and hanging out and getting to know each other. Booked and played a few gigs or whatever, and then that's where the problems start to surface. And because that seems like 2 years is about the amount of time you have in between working jobs and whatever, and your family, and all, like I said, there's a gazillion different reasons that infiltrate this whole process. But it seems like if you could survive and make it past the 2-year mark, then maybe your band will be around for 8 to 10 years, because you can weather those kind of things. So when it just seems like 2 years seems to be the lifespan. Just back, I got fired from Vern Gosselin being. Man, I'm gonna have to. Boy, the messages are popping up. I'm gonna have to try to. I might have to come back, guys, and see what you're saying here. Joffrey says, I think about Lars and James Metallica, and I read Lars basically don't play very well when he and Hetfield's. I think the Seymour thing won't work very well on my phone. But there's another example of a superstar band, Metallica, who fired Jason Newsted. You know, that was a big deal, I would think. That wasn't a local cover band who, plays 20 or 30 shows a year. This is a worldwide known, multi-million-dollar selling, just a huge machine that fired their bass player. So, John says, Riding By has a great story about Lars. Oh, cool. I will ask Jim about that today when I see him. At any rate, I forgot what I was saying before. There's, the lifespan of a band being about 2 years, because that seems like how long you have to be around somebody to find out, like, can I work with this person or not? So in that scenario, things that bother each other sometimes never get discussed because maybe they're afraid to discuss those things, like maybe they need to learn songs better. How you're being represented as a whole. I've been the drummer for Midline for 27, 28 years or something like that. If, we don't have the popularity that we once did, but I think some people still, from the old school, knows who we are. If I was driving down the road and I was road raging and I flipped somebody off and somebody said, isn't that the drummer for Midline? Now that whole instance is associated to the band. And those are some of the things that I think about, like, how you're conducting yourself and what you're doing. It's not just you. It's like, does that represent the band that you're playing in? If the whole band's hanging out at a club and somebody in the band's being really stinky with some of the wait staff or whatever, that reflects on the band. So those are those kind of things that start to surface, and people decide, am I going to still, want to be associated with this? Being a good hang is huge. Def Leppard and then staying together with Rick Allen is so amazing thing. Yeah, definitely. That's a whole nother story there, Greg, with Def Leppard. That's, he had a drummer lose an arm and he didn't get fired from the band. They cared about their brother. That's a family. They cared, like, the band didn't matter at that moment. What mattered was Rick Allen's health. And of course, Rick Allen's determination to, like, I'm going to overcome this thing. And he did amazing, and he continues to do amazing, and he continues doing amazing things. And that, we could probably talk about that for a couple hours, just that whole thing. So anyway, like, when things start to bother each other, you got to discuss those. If you're, especially if you're touring, you're spending a lot of time together. Like, Midline spent like this 10-year period in our career where we were doing 150 to 180 shows a year because we had a small record label deal. We were sponsored by Jägermeister, so we got to be part of these Jägermeister tours, including Saliva and Breaking Benjamin and bands like that. And so we were gone a lot, and you spend a lot of time in a van with the trailer, and does somebody have hygiene issues? Which I think we all were guilty of at any given moment. But that's the way it is when you're out there slugging it in the gutter, kind of a thing. So, you got to have patience with each other because we're people. And make no mistake, everybody in Midline has had their share of arguments and screaming matches and things like that. And all along the way, somebody somewhere along the way threatened, I'm going to quit the band, or I'm going to fire you from the band. Because when you get hot and you're in that moment, sometimes we just say stuff that we shouldn't say, or that we said it, but in reality, we really don't mean it, But but we had a common goal. We were on this thing. We were on this journey. We were all pointed in the same direction. And so that is how we were able to weather those storms of inconvenience, because it's just a small thing at the moment. But like I said, sometimes you want to just create fabricated drama because it's just easier to be mad than it is to be forgiving. So you've got those kind of things that you're dealing with. Another thing that have been witness to is, your bands go. This is not Midline. This is a totally different group. But you find out that there's infidelity happening. This person in the band was fooling around with this person's wife. I giggle, but that has happened to bands. That'll be a good reason to get fired, amongst other things that accompany that whole situation. One thing that we all saw not too long ago was how COVID, affected everybody. Not just band people, but I'm in a band, so that's one of those things. And nobody knew what to think, and it seemed like you were on this side of the fence or you're on that side of the fence with that whole thing. And I saw bands fall apart because you got somebody in the band that's been vaccinated 8 times and has 31 boosters, and they're coughing and sneezing all over the place, and they're firing the person in the band that didn't get vaccinated, and the person that has been vaccinated is completely like, "What I do? I didn't do anything to you," And so there's these arguments over, I don't care what side of the fence you are first on the whole COVID thing. Vaccinated or not, I don't really give a rip. I don't. But those were the things that people came together. And first of all, prior, these people were lovey, great time. And then as soon as this whole thing happened, that's when those opinions and those things really happened. And we saw tons of bands fall apart over those situations. It was, what a terrible, awful thing. Yeah, that, another thing is like typical bands have 1 or 2 people that do a lot of the work, if not all of the work. Maybe there's somebody in the band that's really good at and takes charge of booking and production and marketing and all of these kind of things. And they're doing all this work. And if you personally never booked your band and never had to book hotels for your band and never got out a map and said, this is how we're going to go, and this is, had a tour itinerary, lobby calls, bus calls, sound check time, there's a heck of a lot of stuff to keep track of. If you've personally never dealt with that, but you've been in a band with somebody else doing that, thank those people for one, because you're along for the ride, apparently. Not that that's bad, but I've been in bands where somebody's doing all the work, and the only responsibility of the other people in the band is to show up on time and know the songs. If those people can't show up on time and know the songs and they're not doing any other work, then they probably shouldn't be in your band anymore. But those things should be discussed early on. Like, hey guys, I'm going to take care of all the booking. I need you to look like you belong in the band. That's another thing, is deciding what your band wants to be. If you want to wear cargo shorts and look at iPads, I don't care. I'm not going to be in your band either. I have a different thing in mind for what I want to do musically, and it's not iPads and it's not cargo shorts or flip-flops or any of that garbage. No, I want to look like I belong in the band on the stage and know my songs up here. And same with the people I play music with. they too were like, that's why I play music with them, because we are in alignment of what we think is important and what we want to do. So, but, if you got the one person in the band who's played this song 50 times and they still don't know where the solo is, get them out. Because they're not helping you. That's just reality as far as I'm concerned. If you got people that are just slacking and not doing anything, they're not making any posts on social media. Hey, we're playing in Milwaukee tonight, or we're playing at Joe's Crab Shack. I don't care where you're playing. If you're doing nothing to make that event successful, then why are you even there? It just makes zero sense to me. Nothing. I think, but like I said, getting those things out and deciding what's important early on makes those discussions easier as you go along. So, know, for the love of Pete, know the songs. That's me editing myself. Nothing drives me more crazy than somebody that you've played songs with on stage dozens of times and they're still flubbing. It's like, Mark's here. My new band name is Ken Cargo Shorts and the iPads. That's awesome. Who's your drummer? I want to see this. Oh. Gary said, my tour management is my bitch, especially for a major artist. Yes, Gary, yes. You are. I'm sure you've done your fair share of babysitting, even for these well-known artists. There's a reality to that, but it's also like, really? I have to babysit grown adults. That just shouldn't, seems like that shouldn't be the case, but I digress. So I was going to go back to John Conley. Midline has been a band since 1990. And the only original member of the band is Anthony Fagiano, the singer. Now, when the band first got started, I guarantee you when those four guys were looking at each other, they never thought, ever, that they wouldn't be in the band 33 years later. I guarantee it. The original four people that were in that band who got together and had this dream and started doing stuff never looked at each other and said, who's going to be the last man standing? I guarantee that wasn't a thing. And so, Sean's here. Hey, Sean. That's what I tell people, that short story about what I used to do in the music business was babysitting rock stars. Sean, I don't know if you know Gary Tackett here. Gary, I don't know if you know Sean, but if you guys don't know each other, you probably have a lot to talk about. Make that connection, gentlemen, if you haven't, because I'm sure you guys got stories for days and days and days that'll go on and on. So with Midline, I first saw Midline in 1991 or 2, and I was at a Bogey's like local band night thing, because I was looking at this band Tuesday's Child because I was going to audition for that band. Their drummer was leaving, and that's one thing that I want to talk about, like quitting a band. The drummer for this band was quitting. He was joining the military and leaving, so that there was no like drama involved. But the band Tuesday's Child wanted to continue. They just found themselves needing a drummer. And through a series of friends, this networking thing, which is still relevant to what I'm trying to do now, is networking. But this was one of those situations where I was networking and getting to know people in the Boise music scene. because I was fresh out of high school and chasing my rock star dreams. Heard of this band that the drummer was quitting, so I went to go see this band play, saw them play, I thought they were great, met the guitar player and the singer, and that night made arrangements to get together. They gave me a cassette tape of songs to learn. Plus I saw them perform live, and I thought they were great. But the band that played after them was Midline. Midline wasn't looking for a drummer, but there was a huge difference from all the other bands when Midline got on stage. They looked like rock stars, for one. And I thought, these guys are a local band? I was used to seeing local bands that looked like local bands and sounded like local bands, and I was going to audition for a local band. But Midline, being a local band, like I said, they looked like rock stars. They had a show. They had a flow to their whole production, and I was blown away. I didn't know those guys at all, but I thought, in the back of my mind, I was like, okay, I'm going to audition for Tuesday's Child, but man, I want to be in a band like that. That's what I was thinking. I want to be in that band. They weren't looking for a drummer. So I thought that in my mind, I want to be in that band, and then I auditioned for Tuesday's Child, got in the band, and all of that stuff. Quick little side note on that, I was in that band, but again, it wasn't like, it was great music, and I really liked those guys, but the four of us in that band were not on the same trajectory. There was different ideas about, I want to do this, I want to do that. I'm here, but I'm going to get this job. But, it felt like there was too many offshoots that prevented like a common goal from being there. But it was fun, and so I ended up quitting that band, which I had played a handful of shows with them over a period of a year or so. And we played a lot of shows with Midline, and but I found an opportunity to go tour with a band from Tampa, Florida, and so I auditioned for that band and got in that band and went on the road. And that's the longest I've been gone from home, was for 7 months straight, just gone, and out touring and doing the thing, and so I just was personally always looking for that next level thing to be a part of. When that tour ended, I came home. I was kind of trying to decide what to do. I tried to put Tuesday's Child back together, and that band had just fizzled after I left. And so the guitar player and I got together and put another band together, and it was just it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work to get things to start, and then it was a lot of work to keep things moving. During this time, Midline had a couple different bass players come and go, and they ended up with Alfred Deverone in the band. All my local friends probably know Alfred. I was down at Granny's basement one night and walking through, and the Midline guys weren't there who would normally be there. And I ran into another drummer in town. His girlfriend was there, but he wasn't. And I asked where he was and where the Midline guys were, and she told me that Chad, was going to be the drummer for Midline because they fired John Conley. And my mind inside just exploded. When I got started in the Boise music scene, John Conley was one of the first people that just really welcomed me into the circle of musicians. Because I was pretty nerdy with my glasses and my goofy curly hair looking like Napoleon Dynamite. When I was trying to grow my hair out, it just was an awful mess. But I was just blown away that Midline had fired John Conley. John was a real just simple drummer. John Conley's drumming to me was more like AC/DC bass drumming. There wasn't fast, fancy drum fills going on. no complicated rhythms, just just crushing drums. And, of course I'm thinking, like, why would John Conley be fired from the band? They were just newly on the radio for maybe a month, selling CDs like crazy. I mean, pirate radio was pumping Midline heavy on the radio. It was like these guys suddenly became local superstars, and they were my friends. And I just thought it was the coolest thing. I didn't look at Midline's success versus what I was going through and go, well, they were just lucky and what they do, or I wasn't thinking anything. I was like, see, those guys can do it, so can I. That's where my mind was. But then when I found out they fired John Conley, I was just like, it was devastating to me because I was such a John Conley fan. And, it turns out he's a big Fred Fisher fan. And I know the drummer Chad, that they were getting in the band, and Chad was a really great drummer, but he wasn't a powerhouse drummer, He was a much lighter touch. I just didn't see, like, when you have a muscle car and you pull the motor out, you don't put a weed eater motor in there. And that's kind of like, that's probably the only comparison I can make, is like, it still looks like a muscle car, but it doesn't sound like one. It doesn't move like one. And so my mind is just spinning, because my band was just, like I said, it was pretty fragmented, and it was just so much work to make it happen. And so I kind of, all these ideas are going through my head, and all these possible opportunity situations. And so without being told, I started learning the Midline record, just because I had some sort of thing inside me that said, that's probably not going to work out with Chad. And that's exactly what happened. I saw Midline play a handful of shows with Chad drumming, and I was there, and then it wasn't quite right, but I love those guys, and it was like, man, this is... So when Scott Elliott walked up to me and goes, Fredley, when are we gonna jam? I was like, I'm ready to go now. I had already learned their album. I was ready to go, and I went and played. Now, John Conley would have never been fired from the band, but he did something. I'm not going to tell you what he did, because it's not my place to say. And it's never been a public thing. These kind of little stories like that, within the circle of the band, we call it the Midline Mafia. Because it's not something that we publicly, there's just things that publicly we don't discuss. But I will tell you this, that what John did for the time it happened would easily be perceived as something that would be career ending for the band. That's how serious the situation was. And those other guys in the band were not going to let this side thing totally derail the momentum and everything that was happening. It was like, okay, this happened. It shouldn't have happened. It can't happen again. We can't have that risk of this. You're gone, kind of a thing. I'm sure there was more words that were said than that, and not as calmly. And then my first show with Midline, I knew that John Conley was coming to the show, and I was kind of freaked out, because here was this guy who was, like, in my eyes over the few years I had known him, was like a rock star. Now I'm sitting in his seat. So I was really not sure how this was all going to go. And when John came walking into the club and he saw me, he ran to me and gave me this big bear hug and immediately diffused that entire situation. Just completely. John knew he had messed up. And so that, he didn't know it at the time, but that ended his career for being a drummer. That was it. He had done some other stuff past that, but nothing ever amounted to anything like what Midline was achieving. And he hugged me and he kissed me on my cheek and he said, if anybody deserves this, it's you, and I'm glad it's you. And I've had his support ever since. And it's pretty awesome because he and I had the same discussion, just a little over a week ago when we saw each other at the football. Now, we've seen each other along the way, running into each other occasionally around town and things. We've always been friends. And so that was a really cool moment, though, back then, because Midline was off to the moon. and I was in that guy's chair, so that it was a cool moment. So like getting fired from the band isn't the be all end all to everything. I think sometimes it's just necessary. One thing, with bands is, maybe there's somebody in the band that's unbelievably controlling of the situation. Unless you're okay with just somebody running the show and you just need to show up on time and do your part, great. Some people prefer that. I'm more of a hands-on kind of guy. So I like to be involved with the decision making and such. And, but there's other situations, other bands I've played in where, those roles were already established, where somebody was already in control, and hey, I'm here to serve, and that's a really great attitude to have, is just like in a servant capacity, like, what can I do to help you? That's kind of the situation with me and Cliff Miller. Cliff Miller does almost all the work, and he's just really consistent, and he's on his path, and he does his thing. And that doesn't mean he doesn't solicit opinions from people in the band occasionally, but that's a situation where the name of the band is Cliff Miller. The name of the singer guitar player in the band is Cliff Miller. That's it. It's like being Garth Brooks, it's his name, it's his reputation, it's his brand. I'm there in a drummer capacity to help move Cliff's vision along however he sees fit. And I'm perfectly okay with that. Now, I do have other things. I'm a rock and roll drummer. That doesn't mean I can't play country, because I've been playing country for the last 4.5 years. And it was something I had to kind of learn to do. There's a whole different feel to playing country music. But I have, in my mind, I have this piece of me that wants to tour arenas on a big stage in front of thousands of people doing my thing. Big, huge movements, the flash, all of that stuff. That's what I'm working on. But let's see, what else can I tell you? Sometimes, for example, real quick, because I got to wrap this up in 10 minutes. Going back to the COVID thing, most everybody knows that Scott Elliott and Stymie are no longer in Midline. And like I said, when Midline first got together, those original 4 people, Anthony, Scott, Jason, and John, I guarantee they didn't sit in a room and look at each other and have that who's going to be the last person standing thing. Like, they were on a path where that included the 4 of them, and it would always be the 4 of them. Well, now it's just the one of them. And now it's Anthony's the last man standing. But I've been with Anthony for, like I said, 27, 28 years. It's when we're just talking casually, it doesn't seem like there's been any other drummers except me, because I've been in so long and been a part of so many things. But now we have JB Allen on guitar, and we have James Lancaster on bass. And I would never say this lineup of the band is the best, but it is the best. Like, each new chapter of the thing is the best for what it is at that moment, and it's a really great feeling. And we're starting to write together, the 4 of us, and we've got a song that's being mixed as we speak that will be released soon. And it's a really great thing. But so, like, quitting the band, December of 20, I get a phone call on a Saturday morning from Scott Elliott, and he has a certain defense in his tone, the way he's talking to me, and I'm a little bit, sideswiped, if you will, like with this information that he's like, I'm not coming back to the band. When this thing lifts, this whatever this garbage is that we're under, when it's over, I'm not coming back. And I didn't respond with any yelling. I didn't respond with any criticism. I just wanted to listen. And I wasn't even necessarily trying to understand at that moment, because I've been through these things enough to know that the knee-jerk reaction thing never ends well. Did I want Scott Elliott to lead the band? No, I did not. I love Scott, and original guitar player and brother, like a family member, friend. Again, like, there's so many things that band shared together, crying tears together, joy. Everybody in the band has been through relationship trouble, except me, because I'm perfect. No, there was a part of me that wanted to fight to keep him. And another part of me, just from what he said, was like, I don't think that's going to work. Like, I'm nearing 50 years old. I don't feel like I have to convince people to play music with me, or to convince them of a dream or anything like that. He had just came to a point in his life that he said, this thing for me musically is not working. I'm going to do this other thing. And at the moment, we did not like it. And then by spring of the next year, Stymie also left. And so, with Scott leaving, that was bad enough. But we could still continue to function because we had JB on guitar, and we'd been writing with JB. We still had Stymie. But if you've paid attention to Midline's music, the bass has so much to do with the sound. So Stymie left. And so it took a long time to wind up where we are now. But if you listen to any song off the first Midline record and you listen to the brand new stuff that's coming out, it still sounds like Midline. It's like our identity as a brand didn't get lost, which is a cool thing. Now, if we were trying to replace Anthony, that probably wouldn't work so well. But anyway, those are my thoughts and my experiences on this whole getting fired thing. And sometimes I've also seen this happen, and I've also witnessed this happen too, is that, this happened to me, is when things were going so well for Midline when I was in the band, and we had actually recorded a full second album that was never released, because I too got fired from the band. I didn't do anything that resembled what John Conley's involvement was, but I will tell you that I had toured with that band for 7 months, and so I got exposed to a lot of the business side of the music business. And so I saw how things were going with Midline, and I thought there was a lot of, so it was business related. There was some pretty big disagreements in how business was being conducted. Had nothing to do with the music or playing shows or anything. And I was feeling like we should be watching our backs more. And, that's where it felt like the band was on a united front, and then that totally blew up in my face to where I was out of the band. Now, looking back all these years, Anthony will tell you, and I will tell you also, that I was right, but how the situation was handled was not right. So, had maybe that gone a different direction, I don't know what the outcome would be. But it is what it is, and you try to learn from those things and keep moving forward. So in the end, it's all good stuff. But like I said, when I started talking, getting fired from a band, it doesn't matter what level you are on. Just like I said earlier, it doesn't matter if you're just a group of friends hanging out in the garage and you're not gelling, or the one thing that I forgot to mention is substance abuse. That'll be a band killer. People with alcohol or drug problems, it may not happen immediately, but it is something that is going to derail the band. It just will. And everybody who participates in that, they think they have a handle on it, but they don't. They really don't. They don't. Because as the guy was the sober one all the time, I can tell you, when you have a sober mind, you look at things differently than the guy that's not sober or that's high as a kite or whatever. And I'm not talking about, I've been in several bands with this has been a thing. The other side of that coin is like if you're in a band with a person or a couple people who have been in recovery, like maybe they used to be an alcoholic or have a drug problem, and now there's somebody else in the band that thinks that they can do whatever they want, that's going to surface. That's going to be an issue. It just is. So I think that if you're in a band with somebody who's in recovery, then maybe you should respect that situation and not let that be part of the thing. It just shut that down, Like I said, there's so many different endless reasons and scenarios that would say, oh, this is just not working. But I think part of the reason Midline has survived for so long and for so many years is because we've had long stretches of time where everybody was always going the same way. And when there were things that need to be discussed, sometimes heatedly, because of the relationship that we had, we could get past those things and know that there's a solution in here. We just have to find it. So, and sometimes quitting a band or getting fired is a good thing. The good and goodbye sometimes is a great thing. One thing I'll touch on really quick, because I got to wrap this up in about 60 seconds, is if you need to quit your band, like think that through too. Like try not to leave your band hanging. If there's already shows that are on the schedule, like maybe trying to fulfill those obligations, that could be a really great thing. And then that's a better chance of keeping your friendship intact. There was another band I had toured with from Michigan, from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Marquette. Hit the road with those guys. I was gone for almost 3 months. We'll just call it 3 months. But about 2 months in, like the plan that had been sold to me for the band, that part of it wasn't really ever being worked on. And I was newly married. I have my wife at home. We'd just been married, barely been married over a year. And I was like, man, the money's not coming in like I thought it was. And Luke! And so at any rate, I just said, guys, under these circumstances, I can't stay out on the road. And I can't keep doing what we're doing. We need to do this or not do this. And those discussions weren't heated. And I finally said, okay, by the end of this next month, I'm going home. And I don't know who to suggest, but okay, at least you have some heads up. So